I'm Stanley Thurston, the founder and artistic director of the Heritage Signature Chorale. I grew up in Chicago, and mostly I remember the public school program of music in Chicago. There were lots of opportunities to be involved in music, after school programs, the all-city programs. I remember particularly all-city high school choir, which rehearsed downtown. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and we had a director who was a member of the Chicago Symphony Chorus at the time when Margaret Hillis was the director of that choir. Really great tradition of wonderful singing with that choir. And we had a good opportunity to sing often, with Chicago Symphony and also at Orchestra Hall. But I remember my high school teacher, Effie Gardner, who was from Hampton. She grew up in Hampton here in Virginia area, and really was a wonderful pianist and a great musician. I think she must have been in her 20s, so she was a young teacher and just very eager to get us in all of the madrigal programs and solo programs. And even the music we were singing in high school was, college material, Randall Thompson, Samuel Barber, those kinds of things. So I early on was acquainted with all of those American writers and some really, really tricky music that we had to accomplish. But it was a lot of fun. Well, the first formal remembrance of the spiritual really were in high school when with Effie Gardner. I want to say Mary Had a Baby. I think Dawson's arrangement of Mary Had a Baby was the first one I remember. We had a beautiful soprano soloist who was a member of the choir. Of course, then I realized some of the songs we had been singing at our church were spirituals too. I thought they were gospel songs actually, but they were spirituals that were at our church. So I remember hearing those, but it was the Dawson arrangements of spirituals in high school that I remember first. We were learning them as pieces that were going to be part of our adjudication or part of the, we were in a lot of competitions as a high school choir. So there would be requirements, for each choir to learn certain kinds of music. You had to do some foreign language, you had to do spirituals. So the concert arrangements were what all of the high school choirs were singing. So when we would go to the festivals, each group would have to sing, all those different types of music. So we heard a lot of arrangements by, again, Hal Johnson, William Dawson. That was before Moses Hogan, but certainly the Tuskegee type of arrangements. One of the first music mentors I recall is my high school teacher, Effie Gardner. She sort of taught me not to be afraid of the classical repertoire. She would just sort of throw things at me and say, okay, play this, learn this. And then it would come up really quickly where you'd be playing it in front of people. Didn't have time to be nervous about it, just had to sort of get it done. Of course, the musicians at my church, Louise Overall Weaver, our organist, she was a gospel organist, but she read music and played music. I remember she taught me the Handel Hallelujah Chorus. That was one of the first pieces I learned to play on the Hammond organ with her. And of course, Nathan Carter, in my college years at Morgan State, a well-known conductor, was also another mentor. I think I learned from him the classical black composers repertoire. He came through Hampton University as an undergrad and then went on to Juilliard and also got his doctorate at Peabody. So he became a figure for me that really opened the world to the classical writers in the black perspective. R. Nathaniel Dett, that's where I first learned his materials, certainly George Walker and Ulysses K. I came through those first with Nathan Carter. When I was at Morgan State, I was a piano major, but I also was very involved in the choir. I became the student conductor for the choir and accompanist. So I got to know a lot of the teachers at Morgan that actually came through Peabody Conservatory. And one of them was our advanced theory history teacher who was adjunct professor, Dr. DeLerma. And he introduced me to the folks at Peabody. And at the time, I was actually going in as a pianist. And then the Peabody instructors said, you should really think about conducting as a major. And so I gave it a try actually during those years, and they actually set me up to do some conducting of concerts at Peabody when I was a student at Morgan State. They went really well, jumped right into opera, actually, the Magic Flute, to conduct that kind of near the last moment. I stepped in for another conductor, but I was pianist for the music students, the vocal students at Morgan State, so I played most of the arias and things in the past and had been assistant conductor with the choir, so I knew the choral pieces, I knew the solo pieces. It was just really a matter of getting the overture or the instrumental pieces. And once I stepped into it, it kind of felt like a glove. It fit. And then I could see where they were headed. And then they kept sort of pushing me to work with other teachers. And I went to clinics with Conductors Guild, American Association of Conductors. I studied in Europe, went to Aspen. So it just sort of fit. And I took their advice that this would be a good path, and it seemed to work. When I was at Peabody, the adjunct professor, Dr. DeLerma, was actually a black ethnomusicologist, and he was putting together these programs at Peabody. I remember Chevalier de Saint-Georges, I first learned about from the days at Peabody, and it was really Dr. DeLerma's research that sort of brought him into the American spotlight. And we were doing some of his rare pieces, including an opera, I think, that they found. Well, I mean, for me, the value of learning them was to be able to facilitate either of those areas if they came up for something for me to conduct. And I think it helped for me with the music of the black composers was something that always had a sort of a natural connection to my interest because of the heritage. And I liked the style of the writing that was a little more the romantic style. When I was coming along, of course, most of the 20th century, if you were going to be a composer or composition major, they're really pushing you to the atonal world. And so that wasn't as interesting to me. And I always liked the music from the black writers because it had more of a melodic feel or more of a romantic feel, which suited my interest. And I like the idea of harmonies, being a pianist, and again, the world of jazz. Most of what jazz is the traditional melody, but with these harmonies that you wouldn't expect that are just so lush and beautiful. So I always liked that part of it, the whole lush harmonic platform that came, I thought, for the black writers. But I think with the European writers, it was the sense of the grandeur of the scale of the piece, and certainly how to bring in more elements. So with the music, the larger orchestra, the big percussion, the big string, those kind of sounds, I think that really aided in making the sounds more lush. And I think of like Adolphus Hailstork, for example, his orchestra writing that goes along with his compositions for vocals, for choir, are very sort of sumptuous in the way that he writes them. And a lot of the young students that were coming along at the time also writing in that sort of lush, sort of Tchaikovsky kind of a feel of orchestral writing. What really pushed me to found the Heritage Signature Chorale were the memories I had of singing in choir from undergrad, the sound of the Morgan State University choir, or even further back to the sound of the Chicago Symphony Chorus. That sound of Chicago Symphony, Margaret Hillis' sound, was just a little bit darker, a little fuller than some of the other sounds, and I remembered that sound. And I always said, one day I would like to recreate that sound on my own. And then when I came to Morgan State University, I heard that same sound and the singers there. Once I finished, what I noticed that there were a lot of singers that came through college and they were singing, and then I would reach back to them. I said, well, what are you doing? They're like, I'm a secretary, or I'm doing accounting. Like, what are you talking about? All these great singers, you need to be singing. People need to hear you sing. So it was a little bit of impulse to say, we have to have some reason to kind of bring you back. And so I thought, well, let's make a place for the singers to come back so that they can sing those songs that they loved so much growing up. And then also, as I learned more about the black writers and these classical pieces that were being done by African-American composers, I was noticing none of them were being performed. They weren't on the programs with the choirs around Washington. So I said, well, maybe there needs to be another group that kind of focuses on that. And that was the impetus for starting that. No My interpretive approach is kind of hard to explain. It's in my head. It's something I hear, and I mean, there's a little bit of Morgan State in there. There's a little bit of Nathan Carter in there. There's a little bit of Effie Gardner in there. Again, there's a little bit of Margaret Hillis in there. I mean, I think all these sounds that were in my head growing up, when the choir starts singing or when I'm working with the choir, I think I'm trying to extract those kinds of sounds. Because for me, it's just the most interesting kind of choral color, which is this very full, voluptuous sound that actually has a lot of expression. We don't do as much of the straight tone kind of, thinner kind of a sound. And I think for the singers that I work with, it's more natural for them to be more open. Some actually, surprisingly, don't have a lot of experience with spirituals. They have actually more experience with choral or, like classical type of music. And they've come because they want to learn more about the spiritual. So they come with this sort of all this singing background, but just for some reason kind of missed the lineage of the spirituals in their experiences. And then, of course, some that do come from a HBCU, historical black college, and have done that. A lot of them come from a church situation where they've sung anthems, maybe not spirituals so much, so they read music, they have the vocal quality, the repertoire wasn't the spiritual. And then, of course, a lot of them are teachers or have an education background, so they're just curious, and interested to want to learn. They feel like this is important, worth their time, would like to be part of an organization that would help them to learn more about it. Well, I think the value of the spiritual in today's society really is that it is part of our American story, first of all. So it's part of the tapestry of what makes America unique, and it's part of our sort of looking at our history with real eyes. We're not trying to avoid the story. We're going to look at it sort of head on, accept what transpired, and see where we can move from there. But sometimes in order to understand it, you have to go back and look at it. In some past situations, the idea was to sort of close your eyes and maybe pretend it wasn't there or don't look at the bad side of it. At least now, there seems to be an openness to want to see the real story and hear it in a true sense of what occurred, and then to recognize that occurred and how we can move forward. So I think the spirituals are really important because it gives us a vehicle to understand the story, because it is the words of what happened. Pleasant or not, it is what occurred. But then when you look at the other side of it, you're looking at how a group of folks that were struggling with that actually produced something that was a positive result, or something that became something to create hope in folks that would kind of bring you out of the situation that's not good to a better situation. And that's certainly relevant for today. We're in a situation now that's not so good. You want to say, well, how do you look past this to something, that could become better? And again, those stories of the spirituals are exactly that. We just had a session last night where the singers were talking about why these songs were important to them. And that was the story. It helped them to feel like, I can make it through this. There's something that I can do if I put my arm around other people to work together, and we can survive this and it'll be better. I think it's a person that has not really been directly related to the heritage of the spiritual. The best way to approach it is from an open mind, first of all. I would approach the idea for that singer to learn what's the story behind this particular song. Because, of course, a lot of the songs are, coded songs. It's talking about one thing, but it really means something else, which was the ingenuity, of course, of the slaves, because if they had actually come right out and said, I'm trying to get to a better place, then the slave master would have been much more harsh with them because they didn't want them to get to a better place, because they needed them to be part of the financial situation and stay a slave. So they had to say it in a way that it wouldn't lead the slave owner to think they were trying to leave. But the story was actually about leaving. So maybe define what's the real story. If you see steal away to Jesus, you're thinking, oh, that's a nice story about Jesus. And it is a nice story about Jesus, but really it's more a story about escaping slavery and a way to look to get out. It's time to go. It's time to find your way out So look for the story. A lot of times that means you'll need to be coached by someone, maybe that's a little closer to the material. And then just approach it from an open sense of your emotion. I think the point that slavery songs are really emotional songs. It actually is going to be talking about hardship, so you have to be open to feel some of that. And don't be afraid of feeling those emotions. And I think it's really exciting that this is a topic now that is of such interest to so many people in America. I mean, I think it's a real push to want to get to the story, and we feel, I think, safe enough with each other to be vulnerable and to just kind of show ourselves the way they are. It's not going to be always that natural from the very beginning, and you're going to want to fix things and, be politically correct and all of those kinds of things. And all those are great, attributes. But I think sometimes the emotion might hit you in a very raw way when you hear how people were treated at a certain time. And then at the same token, if you go to perform it, there are going to be some people that might think that you shouldn't be performing. I mean, you really have to kind of put yourself on a limb. But by going out there, you're saying, I feel strong enough in my belief of what I'm doing that I'm going to make this statement, and I'm going to hope that you will understand it and not criticize me for being vulnerable to this. And if you do, I hope we can talk about it, and I can tell you why I wanted to do this. But I'm glad that more people want to step into it, and I think it's a rich, rich history that I think people will enjoy being a part of once they experience it.
I've been guilt and I've been scorned, yes. I've been guilt and I've been scorned, children. I've been guilt and I've been scorned. Talked about, shown